Hello, welcome to another edition of the National Reentry Network for Returning Citizens Black Table Talk podcast. I am here with none other than our special guest today,
Mr. Terrell Peters.
Yes, Mr. Terrell Peters. Thank you for stopping by and agreeing to, be on the podcast today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm going to just, dive right in and start this conversation. For those of you all who are listening, this is a reentry spotlight highlighting the successful reentry of our brother, Mr. Peters, who's come home, and hit the ground running and is a true success story to this very day. So I always like to start it off, Mr. Peters, with the question. Can you just share a little bit about yourself and where you're from?
Well, I'm born and raised in D.C., Southeast D.C. and Northeast D.C. I am a returning citizen. I did do almost 24 years in prison. And, I'm a changed man after, having to experience, the life of being a prisoner. So the person that you see today is a whole different individual than the person I was before I went to prison.
Absolutely. Like you say, 25 years, 24 years, that's a quarter of a lifetime.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm eager to keep this conversation going and hearing about your experience. Like I was going to share with the people who may hear this video, we're going to talk everything from your experience with incarceration, your reentry journey, right? Whether it was, the barriers, the support system, defining your success upon your release, right? How you overcame these barriers, right? And then we'll get into like modern day, like what you're doing now, your advocacy, your personal growth, your journey with that, accomplishments, your current role. We can't wait to hear about that. And I believe after this conversation, someone out there listening to this particular podcast, right, who's going to get a chance, Mr. Peters, to hear your story, will feel encouraged, will feel empowered, will feel motivated to, do the same thing and make this what we like to call a life after incarceration about not just thriving. Not just surviving, but thriving. Right. Yeah. So I'm going to just give you an opportunity to talk about some of your background. And what I mean by that, briefly describe your life before incarceration, everything from what your community was like, family, career aspirations, what was little Terrell, bursting at the seams to do and at this thing called life?
Well, before I got incarcerated, I believe that I can honestly sit here and tell you that I was lost. I was lost in a society that didn't accept me as a black man in our communities. And I was excluded from the overall society. And I believe that they call that word marginalized.
Right. You right about that. It's definitely, the term is marginalized.
Yeah. And also you can use the term disenfranchisement.
Talk about it.
Well, basically we didn't have, or I didn't see any opportunities in, my communities to be successful in life. I didn't see no proper role models in our communities. So like every other young male growing up in, the areas and the communities that I grew up in, we did with what we saw in our communities. And that went against the overall bigger society. And they call what we were doing in our mindset and our ideology as being anti-social.
Okay.
And because we didn't do the norms of what society was doing, and we were just trying to like survive. What you said.
I'm so glad you talked about it and used, the language, right, as it has to be said the way you said it. Why are black men, black and brown men, right, growing up in the inner city, forever trying to break that cycle of being disenfranchised, marginalized, othered, right? Where is the role model? And I'm sure someone listening to this is going to resonate with that same song and dance. But the fact that, here you are present day echoing that same story, right? Our same history around, being a burden to society as opposed to feeling like I can, like you say, shoot for the stars and land amongst or shoot for the moon, right? They say, and land amongst the stars. And that just never seems to be a black man's reality here in these United States of America. Is there anything else you want to share to just kind of?
Well, just to touch bases on what I just said, like the proper role models are missing out the homes first and foremost. Fathers are missing out of the home component, and that's the most important component that the male need to be in. The fathers need to be in, and without the male being in that in the home, our children are growing up fatherless with no sense of direction. I mean, they have their mother in the home, but we need both parents. And if you can do the study or get the data on how successful, how many successful people that comes out of two-parent homes, you'll see that they're more successful. Even if, they're black, they'll be more successful than the ones who are groomed and grown in one, parent households.
And to your point with the data, making that the pros and the cons around broken families, broken households versus white picket fence families that have, I'm being, metaphorical, but, two parents in the household, two children, boy, girl, a dog or a cat running around, lights on, food on the table.
Got food in the refrigerator.
Food in the refrigerator. We can all see that Leave It to Beaver, family structure. And, even like you said, minority communities who have that structure, two parents in a household, stability, structure, have a higher success rate. They even say, Mr. Peters, that your zip code can dictate or determine.
Oh, for sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. If you grew up east of the river in Ward 7 or Ward 8 here in D.C., majority of they know that, okay, they're going to end up in jail. While at the age of like 5 or 6. They already know that because of the communities that we in and the what can come out of those communities. And they know basically too much of nothing can come out. But I'm not saying that, good can't come out of there, because a lot of good comes out of, our communities. But the majority of individuals in those communities and with like fatherless homes, they struggle. They struggle and they end up in the system.
Early on in life, to your point, we end up in the system. And I'm sitting there thinking about what you just said, like how many of these minority families can just in their own immediate families, right? How many of us can we say fit the mold, fit that, structure where the father or being fatherless is the norm? That's just quick, numbers right there. We could look within our own households and families. Mr. Peter, this is a good way to start this conversation because it's like, you setting the
setting the tone.
Setting the tone. Preheating the oven before you put the cake in there. So it kind of helps us center ourselves around the seriousness of the plight of Black and brown communities, like you said, with the one-way ticket into the legal system to never see the light of day again. So this is serious, and I thank you for, telling that historical reality that, not too long ago you can still remember,
of course,
being abandoned and forgotten by a community that has lost our humanity around things that we see, like you said, east of the river, that have yet to been addressed or changed. And
that's a whole different DC.
Right.
It's a whole different DC. So I had a conversation with someone today talking about our mayor and her constituents. I was like, okay, she's keep getting reelected because her constituents is voting for her, and simply, we don't have voting education in our communities.
Okay.
And that's something that we lack. And that's something that, we need in our communities. We do need to be civically inclined. And that's what I'm working on right now, trying to get, our community more civically inclined and, stop falling for the trap that the system wants us to fall into, which is, to go through the doors of prison or end up dead.
So I like the fact that you understand the sincerity of what this fight is about, what we're up against, and politics, civic engagement. It's like they saying instead of just let's not just tolerate or walk into rooms and spaces where people have to tolerate Black and brown communities. We got to educate, right? We got to talk about, the current reality of what we can do civically to vote, to put people in elected positions that will, foster a community that is actually invested in the people, invested in systemic things that can reunify family, right? Bring families together. So I'm glad you even like you said, using your voice to amplify the importance of that. So talking about that, we're going to continue this conversation, Mr. Peters, and kind of figure out, well, for people like you and I who have been justice impacted, we have a lived experience with the legal system. When people may have been voting the other way civically, saying, we are not going to focus on prevention, right? We're not going to, like you said a minute ago, stop the access in Black and brown communities east of the river, Ward 7 and 8, from having a one-way ticket into never seeing the light of day again. So I want to kick it off now talking about, well, what led to your incarceration, and how did it shape you as a person from what you experienced going through that time in your life?
Well, first and foremost, the first thing I can come up with is that I lacked knowledge of self. And what that implies is, what I'm capable of and what I'm capable of doing, and understanding that true power, lies within me and not outside of me. And just what landed me in prison was that I didn't have no true guidance, whether it was from school or in the household, in the community. And if you're running around with no guidance, you're just going to follow the flock. So if you're following the flock is going to lead you to, being, incarcerated for a quarter century.
It's, you know, that what you when you said following a flock, the first thing that came to my mind was birds of the same feather flock together.
And they do.
And my grandmother would say when she would, you know, cut the news on her and I would sit under her, and, you know, she, you know, point out that there goes those hoodlums. That's a term she would use. She would call us hoodlums, or, you know, don't end up like that, you know, Mr. You know, Foster, you know, work on trying not to be a menace to society. But when you have black and brown boys, like you say, who don't have the structure, we don't have the guidance, right? And I like what you said. You're powerful beyond all measure once you come to terms with that, though, and then you can act. But when we young and
dumb.
You said it. You took the, you know. Let me say it. No, yeah. You know, right? Like you said, it can lead us to making mistakes that, you know, had we had known better, then we could have done better, or we could have took a different road, or, you know, acted differently. But I wonder, you probably know people like that in your family who's sitting there pointing out things in the black experience very young on. I mean, at a young age, and you sitting there reflecting on what they sharing, but you don't realize how soon you're gonna have to really face that truth. You know, it's good that you brought that up, and I'm glad you talked about it from that lens. Like, not knowing your place in the community, it did shape you who you are as a person today, because you had that lack of knowledge, that lack of self, you know, self-awareness. So thank you for saying that.
And when you have a lack of self-awareness, you just go around mimicking others and what are they doing in the community. And unfortunately, that was like selling drugs, or using drugs, or, you know, robbing people, just doing everything against your true self.
Thank you for, you know, giving us the examples to kind of, you know, help our listeners and those who probably thinking that the list can go on and on and on and mimicking that behavior. You know what I mean? And it's easy to get pulled into that.
Yes, and then you take on this system of belief that's wrong. And once you start, you know, doing things that you think that is right, you feel as though that anything that hinders your movement is an enemy. Like I used to think all the police was my enemy, because they used to stop us from, you know, hustling. They used to just run us off the corners.
Wow.
They used to come jump out on us all the time. So I used to I disliked the police, and I thought that they were like, you know, was my enemy, because they stopped, you know, my progression in what I was doing at the time. And I'm pretty sure that, you know, they viewed us as the enemy. And, you know, that's, you know, a lot of police, I'm not trying to change the subject, but a lot of police,
say it.
A lot of police comes in our communities, and they come from like military backgrounds. So they have this enemy combatant way of thinking, and they view us as the enemy. And it's crazy because, you know, we was, you know, looking at them as being the enemies as well.
You couldn't have said it any better, Mr. Peters. I think the self-awareness and the lack of thereof prior to your experience in the legal system, you know, speaks to some of the realities about, like you say, whether it's police brutality, whether it's, you know, they're the opposite in terms of not being officer friendly. The first interaction you had with the legal system probably was that police officer, and then their like I said, their brutality towards you, and then you trying to reconcile yourself with the notion that you're trying to be true to thine own self. You're completely free, but at the same time, the only interaction you first initially see within this this legal system is this cop trying to, chase you off the block in your own neighborhood.
My own neighborhood.
And that's the part that I like about it. You done took up some, space, and you done, claim that, you associated a part of this neighborhood, but yet you saw the officer as the outsider. You know what I mean? And he wasn't giving you, like I said, he wasn't officer friendly. He was there to,
traumatizes.
Traumatizes. You fill in the blank.
Yeah, traumatizes, just terrorizes.
That's the term, right?
And that's exactly what they do. They come in our communities and terrorize our communities and inflict trauma upon us. That's life lasting.
I was just thinking that's it. And then that becomes the blueprint. From that point, your initial distaste of law enforcement, and it continues year after year after year after year, and things can get a lot worse, we know. So were there any defining moments, Mr. Peters, during your time inside that helped shift your perspective, right, where you became more self-aware and inspired to change? Like once you confronted the trauma that you experienced in your own neighborhood, on your own city blocks, in your own community, with law enforcement, with the example that you painted within minority communities who are trying to, live this American dream without, community and humanity from those who just want to see us continue to suffer in our own ways. How did you shift that perspective, right, where you did start to say, I have to, like you said, you use the term power, and gain access to that self-awareness about your mindset and your perspective?
Well, once I started coming into having a little bit of knowledge of self, I started to, reflect more and do more self-analysis, So when I was still, in prison, acting the same way, it came to a point like I go to the hole, and I see that, okay, man, I'm in prison inside of a prison. Like, who does that? How do you get to a prison inside of a prison? And, one of the last times that, I got locked up in prison, it's crazy because I was acting out, still acting the same. So that was like the defining point for me. And I was like, I got to start, being the master of my environment, being the master of my universe, being the captain of my ship. And I do that by just, controlling my environment through my thoughts.
Right.
And just changing the way how I thought. And that was that didn't happen overnight, but when you start to change and you really want to change, it can happen eventually. And eventually I had was part of a group of individuals in USP Hazleton, and what we did was try to change the culture of prison by putting resource centers in all of the units where we can go in there and do a lot of reentry research, and also go in there and type, go in there and write, go in there and just we hold classes in there. So we held classes in there. So this me being part of this organization called United Circle for Hope, that was the brainchild of, a class that I did take in West Virginia University. And that it was a program called Inside Out Prison Exchange, where they had the college students come in and we took a class with them. And from that brainchild came United Circle for Hope, and it was a group of individuals who were on the same page, had the same mindset, and was headed in the same direction. And that direction was we were fed up. We were sick and tired of being sick and tired in prison. And I knew that I was changing when I started not liking ignorance or being around ignorance. And when I felt like I was fighting ignorance all day. And that's how, I knew that I was a changed person.
You said a couple of things that I'm sure, hit a couple people who going to hear this with like a Mack truck, especially when you're talking about the self-awareness and how you just landed with, you being sick and tired of being sick and tired. That's just not something that we've all probably heard as a colloquial saying.
Yeah.
But you essentially became the wind beneath your own wings. You took flight, you know what I mean? And whether it was the United Circle of Hope, whether it was the Inside Out, whether it was you standing up for, what you knew to be true within yourself, that, if you put up that, I don't think the modern term, everybody keep using the term boundaries, right?
Yeah.
You kind of, took control over the cerebral part, the mind, and then you align the body, and then the soul kind of can act.
Yeah.
Even when you say you going, it's like a haunted house. You go into a room that's getting smaller and smaller and smaller and less light. But yet somehow in the beauty of all that you just shared, you found that you and only you could change what the situation was that you were going through.
Of course. And like when I say knowledge of self, it's basically learning how you operated and how I figured out, human beings operate. So we don't come into this world with a blueprint on how to conduct ourselves. So we come in this world, tabula rasa, with a blank slate.
Mm-hmm.
And all the information is given.
You said tabula rasa?
Yes.
That's new to me. I gotta look it up.
Yeah, it's called.
Y'all look it up too. Who's gonna listen to
just
tabula
a blank,
okay.
a blank slate.
Dropping knowledge.
Yeah. So, me just knowing and going through and trying to find, how I operated, I ran across, different knowledge of how your brain works. And I believe that, me and you had a discussion about this before.
Okay. I remember a little bit about that.
Yeah, we were, what I learned about, how our brain is that, we sometimes can function with our reptilian brain more so.
Okay.
Than our conscious brain, our conscious mind.
So reptilian versus the conscious side of the brain. What's the reptilian side?
Well, the reptilian is your oldest brain.
Mm-hmm.
And that is your brain that reacts. It's impulsive. It's your animalistic brain. And
the conscious is the other side?
Well, it's your conscious brain is it's in your your frontal. You talk about your frontal, your neocortex.
Okay.
Your frontal lobe and all of that good stuff is in there. That's like the newest parts of your brain because we, as humans, we're evolving. And after your reptilian brain, it came your mammalian brain, and that's another form of your animalistic, self. That's one of the, fight or flight components. That's where that comes from. And if we are evolved human beings right now, so if we're still conducting ourselves in an animalistic way, we're not allowing ourselves to evolve. And that's where I, realized that our frontal lobes, males, and I believe females as well, but males frontal lobes is not fully developed until the ages of 26, 27. And they came up with like 25, but it's past that. It's a few years past 25. And that's our decision making part of our brains.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's not developed, we're operating off our animalistic brain.
I'm so glad you know, whether you're, you know, right brain or left brain, and you know, because you split that.
Those are different hemispheres.
Yeah.
You know.
So you
Thing
gotta
goes on with your left hemisphere and your right hemisphere as well.
and then you thinking about the situation that, you know, our brothers and sisters who are behind bars who haven't even begin to take captive that thought, right? You got to take captive that thought, because like you said, depending on how you respond and engage with your own inner thoughts, it could lead you to being stepped back even within an incarceral system, right? You could end up getting stepped back. But if you like you said, programming, becoming more self-aware, you know, taking captive of that conscious side of your mind, you can free yourself in the toughest of situations, like you did.
Of course.
You know, through programming, you know, the United Circle of Hope, and the Inside Out program where the college students were coming in and having an impact. I just believe that those type of opportunities, right? Participation in the programs that you talked about, the activities while you were incarcerated, help prepare you for even the work that you're doing today.
Yeah.
And I thank you for talking about the mental part of it, because that can't just be ignored.
Of course.
It can't be ignored, because that's also directly you reconciling your thoughts about the situation that you're kind of confronted with on a day in and day out basis.
That separates, you know, the men from the boys.
Mm.
You know, how you think. You know, you can think like a boy. You can continue to think like a child.
Right.
Or you can grow into this man that, you know, society needs you to be.
And if they had it their way, the people who are just, you know, I'm gonna call it a social experiment while we in, you know, the system, while we behind bars, it's a social experiment.
Of course, and it's changing more and more. The books I used to read, they don't even allow inside of prison no more.
Right.
So they don't even want us to educate ourselves no more in prison.
Wow. Thank you for, you know, touching on those things. I think it helps with, you know, as we continue our conversation, right? Staying true to educating yourself, getting the knowledge that you need to, you know, chart that course forward. I want you to talk about, you know, the policy that was a part of your, you know, release from the legal system, so that our listeners can understand where you just left off, Mr. Peters, with all that you were going through in that dark situation, right? Mm-hmm. The light, when it finally came, how'd you know you were gonna be ready for that day, and what happened after you? That I want you the IRA, right?
It was the IRA.
A little bit about the IRA policy and how it played into, you know, you getting out of that dark situation that you were in.
Well, first of all, the IRA means Incarceration Reduction Amendment Act of 2000. Well, that's what the IRA means, but I came home with the second look.
Okay.
IRA of 2019, and yeah, that law basically stated everything I just was talking about.
I wanted to segue that because I was like, because when you brought it up, I said I gotta give you a chance to flush that thought all the way through, even with the policy itself.
So some doctor, I believe his name is Dr. Steinberg.
Okay,
came up with this knowledge, and he presented it to the Supreme Court, and they basically sided with his findings, and basically saying that no one, a male who committed, you know, crimes when he was a youth should not be held responsible for his actions because his brain wasn't fully developed.
He stood at the Supreme Court and proved this point, you know, and argued before Supreme Court justices. So based on all that you said about, you know, the cognitive and then the animalistic side of the brain, the doctor that you just referenced about how we know that, you know, particularly like you said, childlike little boys are not in their right state of mind at a young age.
Of course.
We now have science that we can follow the facts with how we know that the current system who are locking, you know, these young men up aren't even listening and following the science. And now that we have the IRA, right? You said you came out on the second iteration.
Or like the third iteration, something like that.
We can now reconcile ourselves with what has already happened in the trauma and the lack of knowledge around what was really happening to these youth, these teenagers, you know, in that time in their life.
Yeah.
And it's not to be made light of by any stretch of anyone's imagination. There's a whole perspective that you painted and you so eloquently, you know, told that story of what, you know, marginalized communities are experiencing. And here it is. You almost did. You said a quarter of a lifetime before we even begin quarter of a century to reconcile ourselves back to the science around how the brain develops. And now you're free. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because someone's cared to